Thank you for joining us for the Victory Podcast today. Today's podcast is from June 12th, 2016. We continue our study in Ruth, titled Romance and Redemption, with Pastor Dax in Ruth chapter 2, starting in verse 18.
We're finishing up Ruth chapter 2 this morning. If you would, let's go ahead and stand as we read from Ruth 2, verses 18 through 23. Ruth 2, starting in verse 18. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted." So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests. And she lived with her mother-in-law. The word of the Lord. Please grab a seat. The college that I went to, one of the requirements to graduate was that you had to have an internship for your last 3 semesters of college. And the summer before my senior year, I landed a great internship. I mean, it was a paid position, for one thing. Not all of them were. And it was $10 an hour back when minimum wage was $6 an hour. So it was good. It was in an air-conditioned office. That was nice. You had to wear a tie every day. So I felt, super important having to wear the tie in there. It was a good deal. And I was thrilled to have the opportunity, also because I'd nearly blown it. That same summer, early in the summer, I was desperate for any sort of work. I just needed some money. And so I took a grunt-level construction job. It was hard physical labor. It was graveyard shift, remodeling the inside of this grocery store. It was just miserable. And so, I know guys have worked graveyard in here. You would go to work, I'd get something to eat, come home, and be asleep by about 8 o'clock in the morning. So when the phone rang at 8:30 one morning, I was a little out of it. And I picked it up, wiping the cobwebs away, and it was the manager of this bank who wanted to interview me for this internship. And, I was so exhausted. I don't even remember what I said exactly, but it was along the lines of, "Hey, that sounds good, but no thanks. I've already got a job for the summer," so hung up, laid back down. And then shot back up, out of bed. What did I say? What did I do? Oh, I was so embarrassed. I called him back, pleaded for mercy, said, I'd love the chance to interview for the job. And he was gracious enough to give me that chance, and I got the job, but it was a rough start. And it got worse. On the first day of the job, there I am at my college apartment. I come bounding down the stairs. I got my new Dockers, and my shirt's all ironed, and my tie's all done right. I'm ready to make an impression. And so I'm walking out the door. I get my keys out of my pocket, and I head to where the car's parked. Or where I thought I'd parked the car. It wasn't there. No big deal, right? I just went around to the other side of the building. Sometimes I parked over there. Maybe I forgot. Nope. Back to the other side. Did I miss it? Nope. Slowly it dawned on me that car was gone. Stolen. So I trudged back up the stairs to my apartment and had to call my boss, my new boss, on the first day of work to explain why I wouldn't be there. It's a bad day. and we can all relate to that, I think. You know the feeling of a bad day, don't you? You know what it's like. The alarm clock doesn't go off and you're late to something. The love of your life breaks up with you, right? Or you go through the drive-thru and you don't realize they got your order wrong until you get home and open it, right? Just in the last 2 weeks alone in my family, we've had an insurance snafu with the dentist. Suddenly you're not covered, however that happens. We had a broken arm. We had, our irrigation sprinkler system just totally go haywire. We had our heat pump completely go out when it was 103 degrees. We know bad days, right? We all can relate to that. And there's days that happen that we would just as soon forget, right? Days that we just wish we could erase. Now, a lot of the times, fortunately, we can look back and maybe even kind of laugh at some of those bad days, like the day my car got stolen. I can laugh at that now. But then again, there's other days that no matter how much time passes, they'll never be the slightest bit amusing, will they? There's those days that the pain is just too deep. There's those days that leave a permanent scar on you. We all experience those unforgettable days that are marked by hurt and sorrow and sadness. And for some of you, it's not just a day. You've experienced weeks or months like this, just one thing wrong after another. Difficulties and setbacks and disappointments and even tragedies. And just when it seems like things can't get any worse, they do. Whether you're a Christian or not, you live in a fallen world marred by the effects of sin, which means that you will experience bad, sometimes very bad days. Now, if you're a Christian, you have a hope, a future hope that lies in the return of Jesus, the making new of all things, the lifting of the curse. Even if you're a Christian, you've experienced just a little taste of that future hope when you've been saved and all the blessings that come with being saved. But you will not experience the fullness of God's promises in this present age. You won't. None of us will. This is something that Naomi knew very well. She had her fair share of bad days, hadn't she? Remember, she lives during the dark time of the judges. Suffering under famine conditions, she's forced to move from the promised land with her family to the pagan country of Moab. And there her husband dies. Her sons get married, but in time they also die. She's got her 2 daughters-in-law, but no children, no heirs, no family to carry on the name. And this is a series of bad days that's been strung together over 10 years or more here for her. Then, finally, a little bit of good news. Remember, she hears that Yahweh has visited his people. He's brought them food. So she decides to head back to the land of Judah and take her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And the girls go. And then somewhere along the way, Naomi stops and tries to convince Orpah and Ruth to go back. She says, "The hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So go home. Get out of here. Head back. If you stick with me, nothing but bitterness awaits you." And Orpah makes the easy decision. She goes. Ruth makes the surprising decision. She stays. In fact, Ruth declares that Yahweh is her God. She converts, remember? And she swears allegiance to Naomi, which you would think Naomi would be thrilled about. But do you remember her response back in chapter 1, verse 18? Take a look. Not joy, not gratitude, not even approval or appreciation, just silence. And then when she finally does speak in the story back in Bethlehem, her words are heavy with anger and bitterness. And with whom is she so angry and bitter? With God himself. And even as we come to chapter 2 and Ruth sort of floats out this idea about going to glean in the fields for food, all Naomi can manage is the bare minimum response. It's just 2 words in Hebrew. Go, daughter. She's just resigned herself. She's bitter. She's angry. She can't afford to get her hopes up. Life has taught her that lesson very well over the last decade. She's alive, but she's not really living. You know what I mean? Bitterness has robbed her of the will to live. Bitterness has crept in and shriveled up her heart until it's just a cold rock. She's not just walking in the valley of the shadow of death, she's living there. But now, here, finally, at the end of chapter 2, we begin to see Naomi come out of the shadows just a little bit. She begins to remember that God's smiling face is there, even though it's been hidden behind these dark clouds of providence. She begins to recall that God doesn't bring pain without a purpose, that God's devastations are inevitably compensated by his restorations. And over the course of a single day in the life of this woman, hope resurges and new life is given. Now, if we just think back over our time in this book of Ruth, the last 4 or 5 weeks, however long it's been, chapter 1 in particular has raised some very difficult issues and questions for us. And you can probably sum it up like this. What kind of God is this? What kind of God brings about these sort of painful providences? What kind of God does this to people who belong to him? Those are legitimate questions to ask. And as chapter 1 ends and chapter 2 begins, those questions begin to find some answers. We saw one answer a couple of weeks ago in the conversion of Ruth. It turns out God hasn't been bringing these things about to punish Naomi and her family. He's been using these things to save Ruth. And it seems like God might have even further plans for this young widow here. You can see it even in the structure of the way the story's told. Remember what Naomi says at the end of chapter 1? She says, I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. And what did we see last week in chapter 2? Ruth leaves one morning empty, but she returns home that very same evening altogether full. God's doing something. What kind of God is this? We're about to find out. God's character, which has been called into question in chapter 1, is going to be vindicated. And along with that, the dead heart of a bitter widow will be given fresh hope, new life. And as we come to this point in the story at the end of chapter 2, remember, Ruth's been out all day. She left that morning just hoping to find a place to glean some food somewhere. And even though Naomi is bitter and despondent and distant, you can imagine that as the hours ticked by, she starts fidgeting a little. She starts pacing the floor, worried about Ruth. Is she okay? Where is she? What's taking so long? And then, suddenly, a knock on the door. And when Naomi opens the door, her jaw drops. There's Ruth, filthy and smelly and exhausted and grinning from ear to ear. 30 pounds of barley, enough for 2 or 3 weeks of meals. And then, well, first I can imagine Naomi looking at that and wondering, what happened? Maybe I wasn't clear enough on how this gleaning was supposed to work. Nobody could physically glean that much in one day. We're going to be in trouble. How much does she have here? And then, as if 30 pounds of barley wasn't enough, she pulls out the little doggy bag she had left over from lunchtime. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. I mean, this was staggering. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And that reminds us of Boaz's extraordinary kindness to Ruth earlier in the day, but it also tells us something about Ruth here, doesn't it? Despite all of Naomi's bitterness, Ruth still loves her. And I don't know about you, but for me, bitter people are hard to like, let alone love. You know the kind of people I'm talking about? People who are always unhappy, always complaining, always upset. It's hard to find the patience to be around those kind of people, especially if they're Christians, at least for me. And so Ruth's attitude here stands as a rebuke to the way I often approach these sorts of people. Even though Naomi's bitter and standoffish and cold with Ruth, Ruth still loves her. Ruth is still loyal to her. And we see that by how she cares for her, how she provides for her here. Just like Boaz had done for her, Ruth now does for Naomi. And now after Naomi picks her jaw up off the floor, right, she asks 2 questions. 2 questions that in her hurried excitement and astonishment about what's going on really ask the same thing. Verse 19. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today and where have you worked? You can hear her saying it. But the question on her mind here is not so much where. It's more a question of whom. How do we know that? Well, because before Ruth can even process the questions and formulate an answer, Naomi, who's still caught up in the moment, exclaims, "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Now remember, this story was originally designed to be heard. Where have we heard that phrase, took notice of me? We saw it last week. Back in chapter 2, verse 10. Remember when Ruth meets Boaz and she bows down before him in humility and she says to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me?" And right here in the very same language, Naomi says to Ruth, "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Whomever he may be is the idea. Now, in this church, there's a couple of you who are really good storytellers. I want to tell you right here is some good storytelling. Okay? At this moment in the story, each one of them knows something that the other one doesn't know. Right? Ruth knows that she's worked for a man named Boaz, but she has no idea who Boaz really is. Naomi certainly knows who Boaz is, but she has no idea that Ruth's been working for him all day. And what makes it kind of fun for us as the audience is that we know more than either one of them do individually about what's going on with the situation. So we can kind of look at this sort of amused at their mutual ignorance about what's really going on. They're excited, right? I mean, this is the best day they've had in over 10 years. But they don't even know how really good this is yet. I mean, they don't have a clue. They're just thankful for a good day, for some food to eat. And you can imagine them together standing there in the house, gripping onto each other, laughter and tears and joy and relief, just looking at each other, looking at the barley. It's unbelievable. And then maybe they sit down for a minute just to kind of catch their breath. And Ruth speaks. She told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked. And innocently, totally unknowing, almost just like an aside here, she says, "The man's name with whom I worked is Boaz." Urch! Naomi slides back from the table. What? Who? Boaz? Did you say Boaz? She hasn't heard that name in 10 years. Verse 20, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord." Now don't read over that too quickly. Don't miss what's going on here. This is Naomi, the same angry, bitter woman. The same woman who was so angry that at the breakfast table that morning she could manage to utter only 2 words to her daughter-in-law who wanted to go get food. The same woman who now pronounces this covenant blessing upon this man. Now she'd already pronounced a general sort of blessing, right? Blessed be the man who has took notice of you, whoever he is. But now when she finds out that this man is Boaz, she gets much more specific. She gets much more covenantal in her language. May he be blessed by Yahweh. And she goes on to say about her covenant God, Yahweh, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. That is a huge statement for Naomi to make, because that's exactly the thing that she has grown to doubt over the last decade. But right here, God invades her heart with hope once again. Not just because there's food on the table, but because of what all this says to her about God. Ruth, do you see what this is? This wasn't fate that you ended up at that field. It wasn't coincidence that Boaz came to check on his workers this morning. It wasn't just good luck that all of this food happened here. This is God's covenantal, loyal love toward us, Ruth. This is hesed. Remember that word, hesed? It's translated here as kindness. But as I've told you before, it means much more than that. Hesed is one of those big, important concepts and words in the Old Testament. Hesed is one of God's greatest attributes. It's the word that God uses to describe himself when he reveals his glory to Moses. Back in Exodus 34, remember he says, I'm Yahweh, Yahweh, I abound in steadfast love, hesed. I'm abounding in hesed. I keep hesed to 1,000 generations. And wrapped up in that word is, yes, the idea of love and grace and kindness, but more importantly, it speaks of God's loyalty. His total commitment to keep his promises of great blessings to his people, no matter how severe the cost of doing so might be. And if you're part of God's people this morning, if you're a Christian, you've experienced this. It's part of what the Apostle Paul is getting at when he writes his greeting to the Ephesian church, where he says in Ephesians 1, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in Christ with every spiritual blessing." What does it mean for a Christian to be blessed with every spiritual blessing? Well, as we read our whole Bible, it means that all of the covenant blessings that have been promised to Abraham and to Moses and to David are now fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and as a result poured out on us who follow him. Why? Why? Because of God's hesed, because of his relentless loyalty to keep his covenant promises, even when that loyalty meant the death of his own beloved Son. So we need to stop in our tracks right here at this point in the story. This may be, oddly enough, the high point of the story in verse 20, Naomi's statement, that God has not stopped showing hesed to the living and the dead, because from that statement, from the height of that statement, we can climb up there and look back in the story and rightly understand everything that's already happened, and we can look ahead and rightly understand everything that's going to happen. God has not stopped showing his hesed, his steadfast love, his loyal love to the living and the dead. Now, what's Naomi getting at here? He's not stopped showing his hesed to the living and to the dead. Well, the living, obviously, refers to Naomi and Ruth, the last two members of this family, right? How is this God's hesed to the dead? To Elimelech and to his sons? Keep reading. Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." A redeemer. Your translation might say a kinsman redeemer or a family redeemer. What is this? It's the Hebrew word goel. And it's a term that, in its most technical sense, prescribes from God's law 4 obligations that a male relative would need to fulfill if the situation called for it. 4 obligations. Let me just run those down for you real quick here. First one obligation was to track down and execute the murderer of a near relative. You can read about that in Numbers 35. A second obligation of the goel was to receive restitution money on behalf of a dead relative who had been wronged in some way. You wrote the check to him. Another obligation was to buy back a near relative who had sold himself into slavery because of poverty. And related to that, the final obligation of the goel, to repurchase family property that had been sold due to financial hardship. That's interesting. It creates a bit of a problem for us in understanding what Naomi means, though. Because none of those 4 obligations prescribed by God's law apply to the situation of Naomi and Ruth, do they? There's no murder to avenge here. There's no restitution to be received. They haven't sold themselves into slavery, nor has Naomi sold the land. And did you notice here, with the goel, those 4 obligations, there's nothing said about marrying a widow. There is another specific law about that. It's called levirate marriage, but it only applies to the unmarried brother-in-law of the widow. So what in the world does Naomi mean when she says that Boaz is one of our redeemers, one of our goel? Well, as you read through Scripture, you'll find that in addition to those 4 very technical senses of the word, that same word goel is used in a very non-technical way. It's often used in terms that does not speak of repayment or payment. In fact, the word's very often used to describe God himself. A couple examples. Genesis 48. Jacob uses that word goel to speak of God rescuing his people from harm. Psalm 107, the words used to speak of God delivering his people from their enemies. In Lamentations 3, goel is used to speak of God saving someone from death. So there's this much more general sense of the word, and that's the way Naomi is using that word goel here in reference to Boaz. It's not in the technical sense of the word, because none of those technical situations apply. She's simply saying, here is a near relative who can help us out. Now, why am I pointing this out? Why am I making a big deal about this? It's because I want you to understand something. I want you to see that if Boaz is going to act on behalf of these near relatives, it will not be because the law demands that he do so. This situation is not addressed in the law. He's under no formal obligation. He's not bound to any legal technicality here. In fact, there are plenty of loopholes for him to slip through if he wants to. He's not the brother of Malion, Ruth's dead husband, so the principle of levirate marriage doesn't apply to him. And plus, the law doesn't even address the issue of foreigners who marry in to the family and what responsibilities the Redeemer might have towards those foreigners, if any. No, if Boaz is going to come to their aid, the only way to rightly understand his actions here is to see it through the lens of grace and compassion and love. He's not following the letter of the law. He's doing something much bigger. He's following the spirit of the law here. And that's important for you to see. Remember that. Now let me ask you, though. When Naomi calls Boaz a goel, a redeemer, does she have something else in mind? Absolutely. Anybody seen Fiddler on the Roof? Yenta, the matchmaker? This is Naomi right here, meddling, thinking, planning how to make this happen. She's a Jewish mother-in-law, after all. What's Naomi have in mind? Well, you'll find out next week in chapter 3, but it involves Ruth getting cleaned up, dabbing on a little perfume, putting on a pretty dress, and heading out to meet a man in a good mood. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We can get a clue from the text right here what Naomi means. Look back at verse 20 there. How does she respond when she finds out that this generosity has come from Boaz? It has to do with that word hesed again, right? The Lord whose hesed has not forsaken the living or the dead. Now, that's not the first time we've heard this word hesed from Naomi's lips. You have to go all the way back to chapter 1, verse 8, to see it again. In chapter 1, verse 8, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May Yahweh show hesed to you, as you have shown to the dead and me. May God deal kindly with you. May he show you hesed." So what does this mean? Is it just sort of a general wish for kindness toward them? Sort of a God bless you sort of thing? No, keep reading the very next verse, verse 9. Naomi has something specific in mind here. Verse 9 tells us how Naomi desires God to show his hesed. "The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. May Yahweh display his hesed to you by giving you a husband." And that's exactly what's on Naomi's mind when we get to chapter 2, verse 20. "Ruth, do you see what this is? This may be God answering my prayer for you. This is God's hesed to the living." But beyond that, she also says this is God's display of hesed to the dead. What does she mean? Well, you can imagine if you were watching this story in a play, that Naomi might turn from Ruth and look out at you in the audience and whisper, "If Boaz marries Ruth and God blesses them with a son, the line of Elimelech, my dead husband, will be saved." It's God's hesed to the dead. Now this is all new to Ruth, okay? Don't forget. She's a Moabite. She's a rookie to all of these customs and religious activities. She's oblivious to the plans that Naomi's sort of hatching in her mind here. Naomi's thinking about a husband for Ruth. Ruth's just thinking about how to provide for Naomi. Look at it. I mean, this is pretty amazing. The magnitude of what Naomi has said about Boaz and redemption, being a redeemer, all of these things. He's one of our redeemers. Look at verse 21. Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they've finished all my harvest.'" Ruth, did you not hear what she said? It's like everything Naomi just said about who Boaz is and the importance of redemption just goes right over her head here. She's oblivious to it. It's like she says, "Oh, he's a relative? That's great. Listen, did I tell you about how he said I can work in his field to the end of the harvest? We have food." Weird. Then verse 22, Naomi says to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It's good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted." And I think the sense is, that's right, honey, you just stay with Boaz. You keep close to his workers, you'll be safe there, he'll protect you. And the wheels in her mind are spinning here, freshly greased with God's display of Hesed that has resurrected her hope. You see? In verse 23, so she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. See that last phrase there? She lived with her mother-in-law? It's maybe better translated, then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. It's a chronological statement, okay? The idea is Ruth stayed close to the young women of Boaz until the barley and the wheat harvests were over. Full stop. Done. And then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. And the sense that should create within you is this sort of overwhelming sense of tension in the story here. It's not the ending we're looking for. I mean, before this, things have looked so optimistic, right? There's Ruth, and there's Boaz, and there's all of this abundance. And then it all comes to a screeching halt right here. I mean, finally, after 10 years, it looks like something wonderful is about to take place, and then Ruth's at home with her mother-in-law. The barley and the wheat harvests come and go. That's a time period of about 7 weeks, during which we read of no interaction between Boaz and Ruth. Maybe it happened, we're not told. All that we know happens at the end of those 7 weeks is that Ruth is still living at home with Naomi. Now, why does that create tension in the story? A couple of reasons. First of all, it calls into question the provision of food. That's come to an end. The harvest season is over now. No more gleaning. And along with that, no more regular opportunity to interact with Boaz as they go back and forth to his field. It's almost like Ruth and Naomi are back where we left them at the end of chapter 1 again. Is that possible? Well, yes, in the sense that once again they have no apparent way to sustain themselves. Yes, in the sense that once again the family line is on the brink of extinction. And yet, something's very different now, isn't it? Because God has begun to vindicate himself. And in the process, he has resurrected hope in the once dead heart of Naomi. How has God done this? He has displayed his Hesed, his covenant love, to these two widows by providing a redeemer. A redeemer who, because of love, not law, will act to meet their deepest needs, even at his own personal expense. In his great Hesed, God has kept his promises. This is not just for Ruth and Naomi. This is for you, if you're a believer. He has displayed his covenant love, his Hesed, to you by providing a redeemer, Jesus Christ. Jesus did not rescue you because of a legal obligation, because of some technicality in the law. He came to rescue you voluntarily out of love. And at the greatest personal expense, the cost of his own life, he acted on your behalf to meet your greatest need. He is the Redeemer. He is the only one who can rescue you and make payment for you. He's come to us in human flesh, and in doing so, he's made himself our kinsman, our redeemer, our near relative who identifies with us in the fullness of our humanity. He's the only one who can meet the most desperate needs of your life, buying you back out of slavery to sin. So we don't pause this morning to wonder at Boaz. We pause this morning to wonder at Jesus Christ, who is the ultimate fulfillment of everything that Boaz dared to prefigure. In Jesus Christ, God has showed his hesed to the living and to the dead. And so, when you're having a bad day, or a bad week, or a bad life, when your heart's grown bitter and hard, when you begin to doubt God's goodness and his faithfulness, fix your eyes on his glorious grace revealed to us through his Son and wonder, what kind of God is this? He's the kind of God who has met your deepest need. Will he then fail to meet your every need? He's your Redeemer. He will not fail. He cannot fail. So you come to him.
We would like to thank you for joining us for the Victory Podcast today. This podcast is a ministry of Victory Baptist Church in Hermiston, Oregon. You can find us at 193 East Main Street in Hermiston, Oregon, 97838, or on the web at yourvictory.org.